For me, it's a great honor to be here, right? Now, it gives me a little bit of break from the guilt that I usually feel being on this side of the world, knowing that there are people like you who are working so hard trying to make life a little bit better for those that we left behind. So it gives me a little bit of hope. So my name is Fidel Nshombo, and I am from the Democratic Republic of the Congo originally. Now I live in the US, and I'm here to tell you my story. Now, the first 12 years of my life were as good, and I was as spoiled as any other child in the world. You see, my friends and people in the neighborhood used to refer to me as Baby Junior because my father had a little photo studio in the neighborhood that was called Studio Photo Baby. Every day, my family would walk every morning to the neighborhood Catholic chapel to pray in the early Mass before going to school. When we get home, my younger brother and I would go play soccer. He was a little bit better than I, and that makes him a little more popular. But he was also a little mischievous, and the reason for all the fights that I got into and I got lost. We didn't take a lot of family vacation, but every summer, the whole family would walk to the village and farm and harvest from our plantation and bring food home. At age 5, I was singing in a choir, in a Catholic church choir, and I always wanted to be a field reporter journalist. My mother was this beautiful woman, and I always wanted to go to her to the market, even though she'll be stopped 10 to 20 times along the way by people who just want to say hello to her. And that always pissed me off because I thought, you know, at 15 minutes to turn into 2 hours and I wanted to go play soccer. But now that it's been a while, I look at it and we were people, we were someone, we were somebody, we had an identity. Not because we were famous, it's just because the people knew us, they knew who we were. And it was easy to be identified. You see? And then the war started and everything changed. I heard that the rebels were kidnapping young boys and turning them into soldiers. See, in the first Congo War, I watched my parents try so hard trying to keep us away from harm, stepping over dead bodies, trying to stay alive. And up until today, I still wonder what was going through my parents' mind at the time. The fear that we will see the fear in them. The fear that they felt powerless to protect us. Or the fear that they did not want to fail on their promise to us. Promises like, Father will always be there for you, or don't be afraid, Mommy is here. See, now that I have my own children, I find it a little bit hard to make those same promises to them. But I have to, because that's what fathers do, right? Because that's what mothers do. You know, we die for our children. See, my family got scattered during the Second Congo War. I was at school at that time, and I ran to a nearest church, and not so long enough, I found myself in the city 100 miles away from home alone at the age of 12. See, the only thing I had at this time was a Catholic baptism card written by hand. It did not have my date of birth on it. It did not have my place of birth on it. All it had was my name. I couldn't get a lot of help from the Red Cross at the time because I was still in the Congo. So I was homeless in my own country. For that whole full year in that city, I had to run and avoid police because the war was going on and there were roadblocks everywhere. And I was in the next city. There was no way to identify myself to them. But each time I would get caught by the police or get questioned by the military, I'll have to make sure that I speak Swahili, which was a language, perfectly, and make sure I speak my mother language perfectly, and tell them the village and where I'm from, for them to believe and accept that I was Congolese, that I was not from the rebel, or I was not from Rwanda. They had to believe that I was from there, for them to not kill me. So my language, my mother's name, my father's last name And my village was my identity at that point because I did not have an ID card. All I had was just the Catholic Church baptism card, and it was not good enough. And then the war intensified in the Congo more and more and more. And I found, together with 4 other friends, at the age of 13, we found ourselves crossing into Burundi. And at that point, it was a point of no return. So we kept moving. And from Burundi, with a little bit of help from different people, I found myself in Zambia. We got scattered and separated with those friends when we were chased by the park rangers in Zambia, trying to avoid them because we did not have passport or anything. At that point, we were illegal immigrants in Zambia. So we kept running away. And then finally, I found myself in Zimbabwe. Now, in Zimbabwe, I was smuggled in there by a big lorry, a big truck. So by the time I woke up, I had the police all around me, questioning me and yelling at me in languages I couldn't understand. So I was tired and hungry, and I couldn't even do anything. So I was talking back to them, they couldn't understand me. So they was yell at me, I couldn't understand them. It was these 2 languages that couldn't coexist. And get to a point where the police left. And I was disappointed because I was so tired at that point that I wanted to get arrested. I wanted to get help. But they didn't want to help me. They left because they couldn't identify or know who I was. And as soon as they left, I tried to walk a few more steps and I collapsed. And then the next time I woke up, I found myself in the Home Affairs office being interviewed, interrogated. They found a guy who spoke Swahili who came and interpreted for me. And at that point, they identified that I was from Congo. And they classified me as a refugee. And they sent me to a refugee camp. And I started missing home. And I started crying every day for the first 6 months. And for me, though, after 6 months, I came to terms with the idea that I was alone and I would never get to see my parents again or my younger brothers and sisters again. So I decided to move on and start living in Zimbabwe just as a refugee. And for me, that was the end of the story because I got rescued. But then the political situation in Zimbabwe started changing. And the refugees got dragged into the mix of it. And not too long ago, I found myself with few other refugees demonstrating on the street and asking for a better treatment of refugees in Zimbabwe. And because of that, we're mistreated, beaten, and tortured by the Zimbabwean government. The 77 of us refugees who demonstrated end up giving our paper documents back to the government, saying that we want help. And then we went back to the camp. Little we knew that little paper document was all we had that identified us or gave us an identity of who we were. As soon as we gave those back, we were done. And not so long ago, I went to a boarding school where I had a scholarship with ICMC, a Catholic agency down there. I got a call that all my friends who surrendered their documents were arrested. So I ran back to the UN and asked for apology because I was young. I was about 16 and I'm crying and said, please forgive me. I didn't know I was dragged by all these grown-ups. I threw everybody under the bus. It's terrible, survival mode. And they didn't want to do that. They refused. They say, there's nothing we can do to help you. So I tried to find more help by running to different places and different embassies asking for help. Nobody wanted to help me. I was on the street for that first year. I went back to school. I found that they've contacted the school, and the school said that I had no documents, so I could never, my scholarship was not valid anymore because I did not have legal documents to be there. I went back to the refugee camp and I wanted to stay there, but every month when they did the food distribution or any distribution in the camp, they could not give anything to me because I did not have any paper document to show that I was a refugee there. So I became rejected. So I ran back to the city, start speaking and advocating for those refugees who were in jail, trying to see if we could get any help to get them out or get my paper documents back. But it didn't happen. I was sleeping with different friends every day, running out from the police every day, until a point where things went completely wrong, and the newspaper published an article that refugees were plotting to assassinate the president of Zimbabwe. And when the article came out, all my friends who were in prison were deported right there, and they were thrown to Congo. All those who were from Rwanda were thrown to the nearest borders, Rwanda and Burundi, and get kicked out of the country. And I became a fugitive at that point. So I crossed into Botswana. By crossing into Botswana illegally, trying to survive, I found it difficult now to be me in Botswana, because as soon as I told them that I was a refugee in Zimbabwe and this and that happened to me, they did not have a way to collaborate that. They did not have a way to collaborate that I was already a refugee and I had a refugee status in Botswana. They did not know who I was. So to them, I was just another guy who just arrived from Congo into Botswana. And I was placed in prison. In Botswana, they were put in prison for 6 months until they collaborate your story. See, after that, they threw me in the Dukwi refugee camp in the Kalahari Desert for a year. And finally, because of that story from Zimbabwe that they could not prove, I was rejected in Botswana. And now, being rejected in Botswana, I had to survive, so I ran to South Africa. Now, arriving in South Africa, I already knew from the experience in Botswana that I can never tell my story from Zimbabwe. I have to be a new person if I want to survive. I cannot be me, because there is no way for them to prove that I'm who I'm saying I am. So in South Africa, I had to tell them, I had to flip my name. So my first name became my last name became my first name. I became a totally different person. But still, that was hard, because in South Africa, there's no refugee camp. There is thousands of people coming down there. There's no way to give everybody documents as soon as you arrived. So I had no documents for the first few months. And I had to go to the office every day, sleeping outside the office, though, to try to move up the line until I get the documents. But months and months later, things got complicated, because the police are also hunting you down. The police are stopping you every day if you look different, if you walk different, if they just think you may be a foreigner, to ask you for documents, and I had nothing to show them. So every time and then, refugees were in and out of prison every day. They arrest you today, throws you in Lindela prison, and then when you get in there, you say, I'm from Congo, I'm a refugee, then they release you. But then you go on the street, you stay on the street again for 3 months looking for the documents that you don't find, and the police catch up with you. Then they throw you back in jail. So it's a ping ball. Throw in and out until maybe one day you get lucky and find that documents. So it was so hard and complicated that at some point I was so exhausted. I said, okay, I don't understand this country. I can't leave. There's no refugee camp. Nobody helping you out. I'm going to go back to Zimbabwe, because that's the only place I know and I can navigate. I'm going back and ask for my documents again back. So I went back to Zimbabwe again. And remember, every time I'm doing this, I have to cross the Limpopo River. And there are crocodiles in there, and you have to walk in water up to here, avoiding the crocodiles. And it's just the water pressure. It's just the craziest trip ever. And then I got back to Zimbabwe. As soon as I got in there in 2004, there was something going in there. They were arresting all the foreigners in Zimbabwe, apparently. They called it Murambachina, like against dirt, and all the foreigners apparently we were dirt. So they will arrest us off the street and throw us in prison. And then after that, they'll release all the refugees back to the camp. So I got arrested in that. I got helped out by the UN. I reminded the UN of my story. And it seemed like the only people who had my identity with them in the little tiny drawer in the office was the United Nations, UNHCR in Zimbabwe. Nobody else had it. So as soon as I walked in the office and I told them my name and I told them my story, they opened a little drawer. They had a little folder and opened and said, oh, yeah, this is you. And I'm like, I suffered for the past couple of years trying to prove this, and you had this in here. So after telling them, they're like, okay, we got it. We're going to help you out. I write a letter of apology to the government, and we'll take it from there. So I wrote a letter of apology. And then they said, but we can't keep you up here. We have no place for you. So you're going to go back to the refugee camp and wait. So they sent me to the refugee camp. As soon as I arrived in the refugee camp, the administration, the camp administration and everybody, they denied me all the services that existed in there. So they starved me for 3 months, no place to stay, no food, no nothing in the camp. Because I had no documents. So they still didn't recognize me up there. And now I'm thousands of miles away from the city where the UN has my file, who just sent me up there, but they don't have any record of me up there that I deserve to get all the food and everything. So I have to be starved for 3 months until there was a trip from the UN representative from the city coming to the camp to speak to people. And I told him what's been happening to me for the last 3 months since he sent me there. And he was perplexed, and he was like, okay, they gotta give you everything. So I told them to give me everything, plus a bus warrant to go back to the city, a bus pass to go back to the city and work those paper problems out with the government. So the next day I went to the city, spoke to him, and it was a good meeting, and everything was hopeful. And the next day I went again, a hopeful meeting, that maybe finally I wrote another letter of apology to the government, and I felt like everything was going right. And as soon as I stepped out of the office, they picked me up again. The law enforcement picked me up again, threw me in a little cell in prison, kept me there for a week, beating me up, torturing me up, yelling at me, no nothing, no food. And after a while, after a couple of days, they picked me up, drove me in the middle of nowhere, threatened to shoot me and kill me. And then I don't know what happened, and I ended up passing out somewhere in the middle of the woods. The next morning, I woke up and I was being dragged out of the landfill by different law enforcement, park rangers or something, yelling at me in a different language. And so they got me to a little station. So they were speaking Portuguese. And so I found out that I was actually in Mozambique. So the Zimbabwean government just threw me up back in Mozambique. And so they couldn't speak Swahili or French. They spoke Portuguese, and I spoke Swahili and French, but I also spoke the Zimbabwean local language and English at that point. So English and the Zimbabwean local language became the only two languages that I could communicate with them because they lived by the border. They understood the language. Now, little I knew that added to the confusion, because to them, now I was not a refugee or a Congolese. Now they looked at me and say, oh, you are a Zimbabwean who were trying to cross into our country illegally. So you were trying to smuggle people, and then you got caught in the landfill mine, and you couldn't move, and that's how we caught you there. I refused. I said, no, this is me. This is what happened to me in Zimbabwe. They said, no, we don't know you that way. You are Zimbabwean. You can't speak the language. You are definitely. So they refused to accept my story or who I was. So they kept me there in prison for a few days. And then after a few days, they decided to deport me back to Zimbabwe. So they sent me back in the hands of the people that wanted to kill me because they didn't believe who I was. See, when I arrived at the border in Zimbabwe also up there, nobody knew who I was. They could not corroborate my story. So they kept me in prison up there at the border again for another week. Finally, they gave me a chance to call somebody. So I called the UN office. And the UNHCR office in town, and they told them, yes, I was a refugee, and yes, they should give me a pass to go back to the city again. So they gave me they put me on a bus from the border all the way to the city, and I got in the UN office. I said, I'm not getting out of here. I'm sleeping here. I'm living here. I'm not going anywhere else. So that night, I slept in their office right on the floor because I didn't trust nobody else. The next day, they came and they kept talking and working things out. And I was about 20 years old at this time. And finally, they said, the only way we can protect you is go back to the camp, stay there, don't move until we find a solution. So they sent me back to the refugee camp. So I stayed in a refugee camp without moving or getting in any trouble for 2 years, waiting on them. And finally, after that, they found a solution to send me somewhere in America. And they said, okay, here's your package. We're sending you to America. So they put me on a plane, and there I was taking off, coming. I opened my paperwork, and they said I was going to Boise, Idaho. And I did not know where that was. And so the thing said Boise ID. And then I got on the plane, and I'm asking everybody, going to UK. I'm like, oh, where's this place in America? So, oh, yeah, it's somewhere in New York. I'm like, okay. So we got to New York, and I'm asking everybody, like, oh, no, maybe it's somewhere in the neighborhood. You figured it out. So I stayed then they said, you're going to sleep in New York. I'm like, okay, and then tomorrow we're taking a bus to Boise ID. It didn't work that way. Then the next day they pick me up and take us back to the airport. I'm like, again? Yeah, you're flying. 2 more flights. I'm like, where am I going? They said, oh, we don't know, but you'll get there. So the next one was in Denver, and it's terrible for a state and a city that has the name ID as an abbreviation. It was hard to identify them, and nobody knew. But finally, there was one that said, "Oh my God, I think I know where you're going, and you will die over there." See, I did not want to hear that again. I had gone through so many things. I wanted to be me now. I wanted people, but then I said, "Why?" It's like, oh, the first thing is because probably over there, nobody have seen anybody like you, so they don't have people like you. So probably they'll kill you because just you don't look like them. And I'm like, okay. Then like, oh, what's the second? Like, oh, the second thing is, well, you may freeze to death if you don't die by those people who don't like you. And I was afraid again. So I fly to Boise. I'm very afraid that people won't like me there. And the woman told me, like, oh, when you get there, don't worry. Give me a call. She gave me her card. And I'll buy you a plane ticket, and you can fly where I live, and you're going to love it there. You come and work for me, and it's a beautiful place because I live in Texas, and Texas is just like Africa. So I had some hope. You see, I had some hope to go back somewhere where I would find people who look like me. But I got to Boise, Idaho, and it was the way that woman thought at first. So I had to adapt. There was a lot of discrimination and stuff and all bad things that happened in the beginning. But then I ended up finding another group of people that were so genuine and so good and so loving and caring, and I built the community with those people. And I've been working since then to try to upgrade and build that community of people who cares and love others like we all do. And it's been a beautiful place for me to be. And I wouldn't choose to live anywhere else other than Boise, Idaho. It's been a place that I've been looking for all my life. And I feel privileged and blessed to be there. But just imagine if when I arrived in Zimbabwe, I got off that truck in Zimbabwe, I had an ID on me that directly said Fidel from Congo and this and that. Those police wouldn't have left me up there until I collapsed. Imagine if when I crossed into Botswana, if the UNHCR in Botswana had a database or a registry that could have just tapped into my name and just pull up that, oh, this guy already had a refugee status in Zimbabwe. You see, I could have just transitioned so easily up there because they could have collaborated my story and protected me. Or when I crossed into South Africa, if there was a system for me to just be found and identified so easily without sleeping on the street for years or in and out of prison. Imagine when I was thrown in Mozambique, if speaking Shona wouldn't have been a problem, or speaking English wouldn't have said that I was Zimbabwean, if they could have easily found my identity. You see, that would have been perfect. Just imagine how easy life and the world would have been for everybody if we could have been able to be simply, easily identified by giving out our names, or by just typing your names on a phone and showing somebody that this is who I am. And that's why I'm hopeful that you guys are working out to try to fix some small pieces that may make refugees' life so easy and possible. Reduce the level of stress and suffering that we face just because we couldn't prove who we were to people. I just wanted you to put that in your mind. So thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you so much for this opportunity. God bless you.